wise man once told me that double digits are better than single digits. I don't know why he even approached me. He was just on the street. He had this massive ass beard. I was trying to run away, really, but he kept chasing me down saying this shit. I'm like, okay, I guess double digits are in fact better than single digits. And that, of course, is relevant today because we are on part 10. Yeah, double digits. Fuck yeah. Double digits of Nodevember, which means we are now technically a third of the way through once I complete this. Now, elephant in the room, this tutorial was supposed to come out yesterday, but beggars can't be choosers, and let me tell you guys, right now you're being beggars, okay? I was busy yesterday, but I do want to finish all the tutorials, even if one of them's a day late, whatever. Today we're doing paint, and the idea behind this one, I mean, you already saw the render, but the idea behind this one, mostly because I'm being lazy, like don't let me dress it up in a way where I'm doing a favor, right? The idea for today is doing a very lazy one, a very simple setup that even somebody who hasn't watched any of the Nodevember videos before, or somebody who doesn't really know much about nodes, allegedly, probably not, but allegedly could follow. So this is definitely going to be the easiest setup yet. You can see, what do we have, like altogether something like 15 nodes, but don't be fooled. There are some new nodes you probably haven't seen before, like this normal node, and what is it that we're going to be making? Well, in some sense, it's going to be a paint effect, but really, what it is in disguise, you remove the mask, Scooby-Doo says, "Who are you?" And they say it's really a transition effect, okay? So we're basically transitioning between two layers of paint. So we have the yellow one and the pink one. There's a couple things going on. One, all the distortion in between when we actually pause it here. Second of all, you can see there's displacement. So the sphere is getting bigger as if we are adding a second layer, a second coating of paint, so it'd get thicker. We can choose, the colors. So, this yellow could be blue, whatever, and the transition would work pretty much the same. In fact, exactly the same. We can also control the noise in this transition, distortion, displacement. That's going to be the height of this thing. So, if we have it big, it's going to turn into a massive sphere at the end of the transition. That looks like garbage, but whatever. And then finally, let me bring this back down. Finally, this is kind of like a nonsense thing. We have Fresnel, which if you look at the boundary here, you can see it just adds a little something. So this is without Fresnel. This is with a lot of Fresnel. It's the thing that makes the Earth look like the Earth. And I guess I already mentioned it, but kind of the key idea here, that's a very new, what am I saying? It's new, is the point, is this normal node that's going to let us control the direction of this effect in a very visual way. So we're saying, where's that merging line? Okay, I guess let's get started. By the way, that blend file, the completed one with all the shit, if you want it without following the tutorial and just to be able to use it, it exists on Patreon, along with all the other Nodevember prompts. Okay. Now that my tongue has been sufficiently twisted, it's in a knot. They put a cherry in my mouth. They're like, "Are you a good kisser? Can you tie the stem?" And I took the stem, I put it in my mouth. I started twisting and I took it out and my tongue was in a knot. That's how bad it is. Either way, what are we talking about? How do you make this thing? Very simply. Well, first of all, we just need to set up our scene. This time we're not going to be doing any vector displacement, although, of course, you could start with the cube, bring it down to a sphere. Control 2 to add a subdivision surface of level 2, or you could just add it in manually like an idiot. For the render engine, we're going to be using cycles because we want to be using displacement, which only works with cycles, and we're going to be setting up an HDRI just for better lighting. That also works with Eevee, but not as well, okay? So we've done the settings here. Next in the material for this, which we are going to add a material, make sure that the settings, again, you know this shit, come on, even if this is your first tutorial, I expect you to come out of the womb with this information, okay? This is some like basic SAT shit. Displacement, make sure it's set to displacement only so that we're getting actual physical, like in the direction of the normal displacement. Okay, that's important. And finally, shading workspace. We are just going to set up an HDRI so we don't need this light. And whoops, take this, add an HDRI. I get mine from HDRI Haven. That's my supplier, if you will. And I think this should now be ready, if I'm correct. We have our subdivision, we have our render settings, we have this set to displacement only, and I think that's good enough. Okay, so how do we now make this effect? Well, it's very simple. First thing we need to do is make our two paint layers. The first one, again, we're just going to use the principled BSDF. By the way, it's always important to, first of all, give the material a name, something that, you could really remember what it is. So something like, I have a Patreon. That way we can't forget the fact that I have a Patreon, and let's also save the project and give it a equally memorable name. Like, again, I have a Patreon, it exists. You don't have any excuse for saying it doesn't exist. Step 1, how do we make paint? This is a train wreck. For paint, I'm gonna pick a color, let it be this kind of like reddish fuchsia. I'm sure there's a name for it. What makes it look like paint is making the roughness very low, in other words, making it very shiny, so you can actually see the reflection, the HDRI and the reflection. And then you could also, if you want, add a bit of clear coat, just for that additional little oomph, but we're not going to do that. We don't need it. Okay, so this is paint layer number 1. We can minimize that. That's Control H, duplicate it. And then for this one, we're just going to make it a different color, like I don't know, what goes good with fuchsia? Orange or something? Maybe more like a blue, something supplementary or complementary. There's a name for this on the color wheel. We take these two, we mix them together, and now what we have is a setup where we can either pick pink, you know, that I guess that's a Freudian slip that makes sense in this case. We could either pink, get it, paint number A, or if we go to the other side, paint number B. And then, of course, the question is, how do we not have a single value for this factor, but make a custom mask that kind of converges in the middle using a transition effect? Okay, here's how we do it. First of all, we import this node that you probably have no idea what it is. This is like when you're going back to your Game Boy, you haven't played it in a while, you're getting bored of the Switch. You're like, okay, what games did I have? You're searching around the cartridges, and you're like, what the fuck? I never bought this, but there it is. And then you have to play it because I guess you didn't know where it came from. The normal node, what do? We input in normal coordinates. We can either get that from texture coordinates. This has a normal coordinate. Or you could use geometry node. This also has it. It really doesn't matter which one it is used. I'm just going to use texture coordinates, okay? The way this node works, and I understand it's a bit confusing, the way this node works is it takes our normal mapping and compares it to this kind of like visual reference thing. Okay, I'm going to be looking at the dot product, which, you know, if you ever took a class on mathematics, you'll know what that means. It's basically comparing vectors. The dot product is closer to 1, the closer they are to each other in terms of angle, and then otherwise not at all. What you need to know is we put in normal here, and then we manipulate this, and this lets us kind of pick a direction for this. Again, there's math behind it, by the way, to make this smooth. Shade smooth, and that will not normalize. It will smooth our normal coordinates. Again, you don't need to know what normal coordinates means. Not important. The point is, once we have this, we want it to be symmetrical along this great circle. So it's not like top and bottom hemispheres, but really we want some kind of symmetry along that line. So math, absolute value, gives us exactly that. So now, again, same setup, but now we have this ring that we could control the direction of. Absolute value is taking the negative values over here. This isn't 0, but it's negative values, and basically what absolute value says, you know, this is a robbery, make it positive, okay? That's the point, okay? So now we have an absolute value, and the key insight here is if we take the setup and just do a bit of a manipulation, you just do an add slider, we can actually do this kind of converging effect, right? Because we are right now subtracting values, so, you know, it kind of goes outwards from that ring. So when we go to -1, it should be completely black, and then when we go to 0, it gives us the original, and we have to go all the way up to 1 for this, okay? Key insight is that. By the way, you know, going from -1 to 1 ain't like, you know, it ain't the most beautiful thing in the world. You know, you might, you know, if you see it on Tinder, you might be, okay, I swipe right on everything, you know, we'll just let this one slide. But we have bigger standards here, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to use a value node again. Right now we have -1 to 1, and what we need to add, that's not convenient. We want it to be between 0 and 1 that we could plug in here. To fix this, use a map range node. That's the classic solution. So we want our 0 to 1 to go to -1 to 1. In other words, 0 is mapped to -1 on this interval, and 1 is mapped to 1. So now we have a nice slider that controls everything. At least it should. Yes. Okay, cool. Next step, how do we... Oh, okay, well, before next step, just so you understand what's going on here, at this moment, we could take this, plug it into the factor, and it's going to do exactly what you think it does, right? It's going to be basically the transition effect between these two. But now the name of the game is how do we make this interesting, is what I was going to get into, okay? To make it interesting, we don't just want this kind of symmetrical effect. We want some distortion, some noise, some warble, okay? And the people who live the most interesting lives are those that have some serious fucking damage, okay? So let's add some damage to this, long story short. To do this, noise texture, we are going to mix these together. So in other words, we're taking the kind of symmetrical effect from before, this thing that we made, we're incorporating in our noise, and there's this whole theory about why this kind of does some shifting. Long story short, without needing to know too much, because again, I want this to be beginner friendly. The Nodevember pros, the real homies, know why we're going to do this, but make sure this is set to linear light. This is just going to make a correction term that lets us control kind of the strength of this, okay? For those of you interested, when you add in noise, it's going to, on average, add 0.5 offset because it's adding 0 to 1. So on average, over many points, it's adding 0.5. Linear light corrects for that with a magnitude, right? So the correction term is also dependent on this. Don't worry about what that means. Point is, we now have noise that controls this, and not only can we control the strength of the noise, but we can control the quality of the noise. So, for example, if we want this transition to be a bit more detailed, we bump up the detail. So now this has more like ridges and stuff. We could also add in a bit of roughness, which will kind of soften everything. Maybe not too much, but what makes this look cool is just a bit of distortion, which will make it nice and swirly. I think mine was something like 2, and this gives it the nice kind of like watery, painter-like effect. Now, while this does work, so we can bring this up, it's going to make this transition effect. One thing you're probably going to notice is when we go all the way up to 1, I guess it's not doing it too much in this case, but with my example, I think I made the noise much more intense, like added full volume. You're going to see that even when this is set to 1, we're still getting a tiny bit of pink. And again, this is because of the offset here. So if you want maximum distortion, and again, you're going to have this issue in the other way, you're probably going to see a bit of blue. To fix this, if you have maximum distortion, otherwise you don't need to care about this. Instead of going from -1 to 1, we just need to make it more intense, like 1.2 gets rid of it, and then like -1.2 in the other direction, right? Generally, we're not going to have the noise be that intense, so I'm just going to keep it at around 0.5, which still has a tiny bit of pink. Hopefully YouTube compression doesn't slaughter that, right? So let's just bring it up a tiny bit so it's gone. So again, we're making this a larger effect, and now let's see what we got. When this is 0, we have basically our mix shaders saying bring BSDFA through, and then as we go up, it does this transition effect until we get to 1, and then it says only reveal B, okay? What makes this interesting now is we can not only have this change in, BSDF, but we could have a change in displacement. Again, this idea of the second layer of paint being dummy thick, right? This is going to be a thick-ass layer of paint, okay? To do this, all we need to do is add in a bit of displacement. If you've never used displacement, you know what? Everybody's first time is awkward. Don't worry about it. Displacement, take this, connect it into displacement, and first of all, mid-level, set it to 0. So this way it doesn't affect anything, right? So whether or not this is here, nothing changes. All you need to know is we're going to take this exact same mix shader, in other words, saying where is BSDFB, which again is the exact mask where we say where do we want it to be higher. It's going to be exactly where the second BSDF is showing. We take this, we say make this the height, and to make it less, this is your friend at the bachelor party. You thought he was normal, you've never seen him drunk before, but who would have thought? The boy's crazy, right? We want to take this and just keep the effect but tone it down. So scale is going to affect that. We want it to be just slightly bigger than 0. So something like 0.1. And now you're going to notice all we need to do is we start off with our base over here. And I guess it's doing some heavy distortion. We could make it more negative to correct for this, but for now, let's not worry about that. What we can do is do this, and it's going to add in a second layer of paint. Now, something you're noticing is that the geometry is messed up, so we need to fix that because it's supposed to be perfectly spherical. And when you look at this node group, you're like, okay, at what point did we go wrong? And to be honest, I did do a cut here because I'm like, I forgot what happened, right? Long story short, whenever you have an issue like this and the node group looks like it's working, but what should be the issue? 9 times out of 10, maybe 99 times out of 100, you just need to enable clamp, okay? Basically what this does is it takes all our negative values, maps them to 0, and everything above 1 and maps it to 1. In other words, some of that degeneracy, some of that degenerate shit that we couldn't see before, that creates the issue. Again, something we can't see. This is solved by the clamp. It says bring it back down to earth, make it less intense. So again, clamping is the solution to this. It gets rid of the negative values and the values larger than 1 so that now we have a small sphere. We now add in our distortion. So again, it's doing the mixing right now. Wow, that always scares me. Either way, we're doing the mixing now. We increase this, and then not only does it change to the second BSDF, but it makes it a bit thicker because again, at this point, it's going to be displacing everywhere with a magnitude of 0.1. We can make it more intense, less intense, whatever. But I mean, I guess that's the general setup. And why is this procedural, right? I mean, of course it is, but let's talk about it a bit. This is procedural because, again, we can control the direction of this effect. So literally just move around this little visual thing and it's going to work because all of this stuff is dependent on this step, right? So everything will work in sequence after this. So again, this is saying what direction is our merging effect going to be in. We can also control, again, let's bring it here, we can control the amount of distortion. So here's kind of like a nice gradient that's, it's boring. This is like your friend that never tried anything, right? This is boring. We can have more distortion, less distortion, whatever. Control the quality of that noise. Oh, that burp came on strong. And then, of course, at any point, we could control the two colors. It can go from, instead of like pink to blue, something like yellow to green, which would look something like this. So it starts yellow or orangish, and then it goes green. And let's bump up the distortion. To make this a node group, in case you want to know how to do that, this stuff we need to leave out here because there's no way to make this little visual thing. We can't make it really a parameter in our node group, sadly, at least not yet. Blender, fix yourself. We need these two things out. We're going to keep this one exposed so we can control it, and then pretty much everything else, take it, Control G, boom, you have a node group, okay? And basically, if we delete this node, we now have a nice slider for this. That controls our transition. Of course, you can still control this stuff. You could add in more parameters like the color. So I'm just going to set up one here. You know how to do the rest of it. Let's make one of them red so that now when we go here, we can control the second color from the exposed node group. But long story short, this has been the laziest. It's not a bad effect, right? It looks good, but in some sense, the most simple, the laziest, the most dumb-minded Nodevember tutorial. But anyways, we can still enjoy that kind of stuff. Meaning, if you enjoyed this tutorial, there is more to be, what am I even saying? You could get the blend file, is what I'm trying to get at. You can get the original blend file over at the Patreon if you like this tutorial. This is a great way to support the channel. On top of that, not only do you get like blend files and that good feeling in your heart, but also exclusive tutorials that I do not post on either channel, behind the scenes stuff, which by the way is becoming very relevant for the next CG Matter video. It's going to be about Sudoku, hint, hint. You could see some renders over there, Discord access, stuff like that. Check out the Patreon if you're interested. I leave this kind of stuff at the end of the video because it really would be annoying right at the beginning or middle, like naming the material I have a Patreon. That would be obnoxious, right? Anyways, I hope you learned something in this tutorial. I hope it was enjoyable, and double digits of Nodevember. Big deal. It's a big deal. And yeah, see ya.